morning, my fellow Shenandoahlians.
Morning.
We are going to have a very interesting program today.
You're in the dark, Larry.
The title is Signs and Wonder, Undoing Creation in Egypt.
No, that's what
Everybody
you
understand what that means?
advertised.
I don't.
That's how you advertised it, but if you look behind you, that's not what it says. It's entirely different meaning.
Well, maybe we're saying two lectures. Rabbi Lefkowitz is a rabbi at TBI in Bluebell. It's a conservative synagogue with over 300 members. He and his wife Melissa, also a rabbi, is at Beth Or in Maple Glen. They came to this area from LA and started their full-time jobs last year. Melissa was a student at the Reform Hebrew Union College in Los Angeles. Kevin received his training at the conservative Ziegler Institute of Rabbinic Studies, also in LA. They are currently living in Ambler and have a cutie pie of a daughter, Rena, who is about 4 or 5 months old.
17 now.
17
Months.
months. Where was I in all of this? The lecture today is Signs and Wonder, Undoing Creation in Egypt, which is very close. This topic is probably very, I don't want to say ironic, but Passover is a mere month away. So it's kind of related. And I'll give the mic over to Kevin.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Larry and Bert, for hosting me. Thank you all for coming. I hope this is worth your time, as you mentioned. Today, the title, it was a change in it's a process to develop this, right? It's called Signs and Wonders, Undoing Egyptian Creation. But really what we're going to go through today is we need to know what creation was before we can know what happened to undo it and what the plagues really were. So we're going to spend this day basically in 3 sections. The first section, how does creation establish moral principles on which humanity can build life? The second, which is going to be the meat of the presentation, what exactly did Egypt do wrong and how did their punishment fit the crime? And then lastly, how can we use this to live life today, right? If we're only thinking biblically, how does this apply to our world? We'll get into that at the very end. So, what is creation? For many people, they think that it's a blank slate. God created the world from nothing, and from there, whatever it ended up being. And you can take that in the religious route, you can take that in a scientific route. But the fact of the matter is, there was a blank canvas that God took a paintbrush to and started molding something out of it. Some people see it as some sort of an ancient story, maybe for kids, almost like a fairy tale, to tell us about how the world came to be. It's kind of nice. All right, there used to be nothing, and it was dark, and then God created light, and we have the sun and the moon and the stars, and first came the ground, and then came the animals, and then we emerged. It's a very nice telling, but is it relevant? I don't know, kind of like a fairy tale. Or is it just a bunch of lies that we tell our kids to convince them to be Jewish because it's fun? No. It's none of those things. It happens to be a series of principles upon which we build our lives. So first, I'm going to read through creation story, and we're going to find a few principles that are, important. In the beginning, when God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, this is the unformed and void earth, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind of God sweeping over the water. That's not a blank canvas. There's waters, there's darkness, and those already exist. And there's a wind of God hovering over the darkness, hovering over the deep. There's some sort of a chaos that God is trying to control, almost like a better version of Maxwell Smart. So if we're doing a creation tracker here, the starting point is there's darkness over the void, and a wind of God is hovering over some sort of water. But let's read back into the story. Day 1. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. This is the light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated light from darkness, called the light day and the darkness night, and there was evening and there was morning, a first day. Excellent. Light is created, separate from darkness, the first act of creation. Day 2. God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the water, that it may separate water from water." So if this is the water, we now have that, well, God made the expanse and it separated the water, which was below the expanse, from the water, which was above the expanse, and it was so. We have upper waters, we have lower waters. God called that expanse sky, and there was evening and there was morning, a second day. So from that original water, God decided to create some sort of a barrier between the upper realm and the lower realm of the waters. Creation tracker. Light is created. Second creation, there's the sky to divide the upper and the lower realms. Reading on into Genesis. God said, "Let the water below the sky be gathered into one area, that the dry land may appear." And it was so. The lower waters, from the lower waters, ground had already existed. Now it's emerging. God called the dry land earth, the gathering of the water seas, and God saw that this was good. Now, earth has emerged in the lower realm, separated by the sky. And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, seed-bearing plants, fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, seed-bearing plants of every kind, these are the seed-bearing plants, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that this was good. And there was evening and there was morning, a third day. Well, there's something to note here. God delegates life creation to the land. God didn't just create these trees. God said, "Land, make the trees." And the land made the trees. So if we're into the creation tracker, what's exactly happening here? We now have the land produces vegetation. Okay. A lot of this should be review, but it's important to pick up. God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate day from night. They shall serve as signs for the set time, the days and the years. And they shall serve as lights in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth." And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to dominate the day and the lesser light to dominate the night and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth. It's a building project. To dominate the day and the night and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that this was good. And there was evening and there was morning, a fourth day. The fourth day. Sun and moon and stars are created, placed in the sky that divides the upper and the lower realms, and that's to rule over the night and the day. So these sun, the moon, and the stars, they're in that liminal zone that divides between the upper and the lower realms. Day 5. God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and birds that fly above the earth across the expanse in the sky." But is that what happened? God created the great sea monsters and all the living creatures of every kind that creep, which the waters brought forth in swarms, and all the winged birds of every kind, and God saw that this was good. There's a little bit of a partnership happening here between God and the waters to create life. Plants were created by land, delegated by God. The insects, the birds, the fish, the sea monsters, that's a joint project. So in the creation tracker, lower waters produce animal life as a partnership with God. Day 5. Still in day 5. God blessed them, saying, "Be fertile and increase, fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning, a fifth day. Day 6. Still there. God said, let the earth bring forth every kind of living creature. Let the earth bring forth every kind of living creature. Cattle, creeping things, and wild beasts of every kind, and it was so. God made wild beasts of every kind, and cattle of every kind, and all kinds of creeping things on earth, and God saw that this was good. This is sort of the same process as with the seeds. God partners with the land to create life. So, God has animal life emerge from the land on the creation tracker. Still on day 6, God said, let us make humanity in our image after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth. We're not going to talk about what let us make humanity in our image means. That's for another time. Happy to take that question afterwards. And God created humanity in the divine image, creating it in the image of God, creating them male and female. So note, the seas and the land produce or contribute to the production of fish and birds and land animals. But only God creates humanity. If there's any sort of partnership, maybe you could say angels, but it's entirely divine. There is no created aspect. There is no creation creating humanity, is what I'm trying to say. Only humanity is created as unique as well. Because if you see this, God made wild beasts of every kind, and cattle of every kind, and all kinds of creeping things on earth. But with humanity, we are only created in the image of God. And if we believe that there's only one God, then there's only one type of humanity. We are created uniquely. Something else to know. In other ancient creation stories, we'll talk about maybe the Enuma Elish. It's a Babylonian creation myth. It begins with the creation of Babylonia. That's usually what the civilizations want to highlight, right? We're Israel. Why isn't Israel created first? That should form some sort of primacy. And it's because we believe that all of humanity comes from the same source. We all have the same inherent value, dignity. And we're not going to put Babylonia above anybody else if we're the Babylonians, because that would be a supremacy that the Torah doesn't seem to believe in. So, move on to see what happens next. So God creates humanity on the creation tracker, and you would think that this is where it ends. But it doesn't, because we have a task. God blessed them, thinking us, and said to them, be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth. God said, see, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, every tree that has seed-bearing fruit, they shall be yours for food. We, humanity, are commanded, we are given the opportunity to rule over everything that lives, but another way to say it, everything that's in the lower realm. And how do we rule? Well, we have the next couple verses. We get to eat what we want. The seed-bearing plants are for us. And to all the animals on land and all the birds of the sky and to everything that creeps on earth, in which there is a breath of life, I give all the green plants for food, and it was so. So we get to eat what we want, but so do the animals, and so do the other plants, and the other life forms that are in the lower realm. And God saw that it had been made and found it very good. And there was evening and there was morning the 6th day. What is very good? God's found a partner to co-rule. We get to rule the lower realm. God's going to rule the upper realm. And unlike the land and the seas, which had some sort of a part in producing life, we have dominion over it. And what does it mean to rule? We do it benevolently. We consume what we need. Humanity doesn't just starve itself so that we can allow other things to live, but we also ensure that others consume what they need as well. So, to allow that all the animals on land and all the birds of the sky has the green plants for food, we have an obligation as the rulers to provide that or allow them to eat it as well. Okay. There are other principles from creation, but I'm only going to highlight these two for now. One, humans were uniquely made and were created in the image of the one God. And two, humans are responsible and empowered to rule benevolently over the earth and all living things. In other words, everything in the lower realm is ruled by humanity. Upper realm is ruled by God. The sky, that's the dividing point. That's where the stars, the sun, and the moon reside. I know that was fast, but we got a creation tracker update here. As part of the God creates humanity, now God creates humanity to rule over the land, seas, and animals as God's partner. Do you have any questions before I get into Egypt? Please.
What's the day?
What day is this right now?
What's the day mean on your charts?
The
Does
day.
it mean 24 hours?
No, it means stage. Stages of creation.
I thought human beings were only given permission to eat animals after Noah, that they're part of the Noahide laws. I thought that before Noah, human beings could only eat plant-based food.
Correct. According to this first chapter of Genesis, it seems like humans have the permission to eat of the plants. The animals have permission to eat of the plants. And there's no consumption of each other. Otherwise, we're good on what happened in creation, the tracker, and the principles. All right, let's get to Egypt. Egypt. So, in this section, we're going to cover how did the Egyptians violate these principles of creation? What exactly did they do wrong? How did God fix them? And did it work? And before, I just want to make sure that we remember that there's one last aspect of creation that I didn't mention. We're going to look at the text inside later on. This is the final piece of creation. God rested on the seventh day, the creation of Shabbat. The next step is the Garden of Eden, what happens there, but we'll cover that later on. Egypt and the Exodus. Let's get into 3 verses that I think capture what Egypt does wrong. Remember, the Israelites have been accused of populating Egypt. They've grown, and the verb used, they've swarmed. That's a word that you almost use for insects. They're multiplying, they're vermin, they're growing. And the Egyptians want to do something about it. But they don't know what they can do because they are presumably an empire that has perception issues, they've got laws. They can't just kill the Israelites, they need to deal shrewdly with them. So we're going to read closely. Let us deal shrewdly with them so that they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in fighting against us and rise from the ground. See, they're not concerned that the Israelites are just going to leave because at this point they're not necessarily slaves. They're members of the empire, whatever that meant in Egypt. So they set taskmasters, and the literal definition are taxation officials over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built garrison cities for Pharaoh, Pithom, and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they increased and spread out, so the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. Just a little bit of an aside, there's an ancient practice called corvée labor, in which non-citizens of an empire would essentially serve, their form of taxation to the empire would be labor. So they would be the laborers of the capital city of some kind. So if you needed a public building project, this year it might be the Moabites, next year it might be the Israelites. And presumably they had some sort of a system to set it up. It seems like the Egyptians are tinkering with that system shrewdly to make it look like it's the Israelites' turn right now. And they made them particularly difficult, but it doesn't seem to work. What's wrong with this? They end up cycling down. This becomes a snowball effect. They abuse the Israelites. They eventually declaring, after the slavery and the increased persecution, that all baby boys need to be put to death. It gets horrible. It starts out with something that is pseudo-legal, and it eventually progresses into just outright attempt at genocide. So how did they violate the principles of creation? Seems like they do a pretty serious job. Violating the principle that humans were uniquely made and created in the image of God. If humans are uniquely made, you can't treat them like that. If they're made in the divine image, taking out a human being in a cruel and unusual way would be presumably taking out the image of God. And we're supposed to be rulers. We're supposed to be ruling benevolently. So Egypt is clearly not ruling benevolently over the Israelites. Blatant violations of creation. There's another level to this, which is their images. There's ancient documents. I didn't get the picture itself, but the image of Re, that's the image of God, the image of Horus. Their pharaohs were seen as images of God. And we believe that everyone was created in the image of God. In the ancient world, the kings or the pharaohs, there were often busts that were created. It was presented with the king or the pharaoh's face. The image of Re is pick a leader, right? So if we're going to push forward to 1776, the United States is just getting started. You know, George Washington is our president. We're going to say the image of God, and you got a picture of George Washington's face. That's how a lot of the ancient world worked. We say we can't make a graven image because if you take an image of any one person, then you're essentially destroying all of the other images of God that are in this room and not in the room. Is that clear? Mm-hmm. Awesome. Egypt messed up. So dealing with Egypt and Pharaoh's hardened heart, God needs to essentially start from scratch. But we're not going to get there yet because each of these next plagues, all the signs and wonders, are going to end up peeling back creation. I'll show you how. Just a reminder of what the steps of creation were, in essence. It started out with darkness over the void and a wind of God hovering over the water. The first step of creation is light is created and separated from darkness. There is a sky that divided between the upper and the lower realms. Remember, the upper realm is eventually ruled by God, the lower realm ruled by humanity. Land produces vegetation. The sun, the moon, the stars are placed within the sky to rule over the day and the night. Lower waters produce animal life. The land, with God's assistance, produces moral animal life. And finally, God creates humanity as the rulers of the lower realm, to rule over the land, the seas, and the animals as God's partner. Now here are the 12 signs and wonders from Egypt. Moses takes his staff, throws it down for Pharaoh, and it turns into a snake. Is it hocus pocus or is it meaningful? I'm going to argue that it's meaningful. The Nile turns to blood, and all the water of Egypt turns to blood. We have the frogs, we have lice, we have whatever arov means, which we tend to translate as either insects or wild animals, but I'll get into what it literally means later on. Pestilence, boils, fiery hail, whatever fiery ice could be, locusts, darkness, the death of the firstborn, and then lastly the splitting of the sea. And following the splitting of the sea, Egypt is decimated and the Israelites are free. The snake staff, what is this? Exodus, cast it on the ground. He cast it on the ground, it became a nachash, it became a snake, and Moses recoiled from it. If we're going to move back to Genesis, the story of Garden of Eden and the snake. Now the nachash was the shrewdest of all the wild beasts that God had made. It said to the woman, did God really say you shall not eat of any tree of the garden? We're not going to cover the story of the snake and Adam and Eve. What's important is the snake is involved in this story. It could be a coincidence. If it were just this one, I would think it probably is. But as we're going to see, it's not. The second sign and wonder. The snake didn't convince the Egyptians to back off, and I'm not sure it should have worked, because it didn't work for me. I didn't understand what was going on with the snake. And the fish of the Nile died. This is when all of the water turned to blood. The Nile stank so that the Egyptians could not drink water from the Nile, and there was blood throughout the land of Egypt. This is the death of the fish. The fish that the Egyptians are supposed to rule over. We see it in Genesis 1:28. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule over the fish of the sea." The Egyptians have just lost a piece of their charge to rule, their doctrine of benevolent control. Lower waters produce animal life. Psst, it's gone. A little bit peeled back. And as an aside, blood coming from the life-giving force, the Nile, was what supplied the Egyptians with water and food. I mean, you're taking away a lot of life. It's showing them that they're literally messing up as explicitly as can be, and they don't get the message. So we're on to number 3. Aaron held out his arm over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. So if you thought you were still in control of the waters, not happening. Not happening at all. Egypt lost ability to rule over the seas. Lice. Aaron held out his arm with the rod and struck the dust of the earth, and vermin came upon human and beast. All the dust of the earth turned to lice throughout the land of Egypt. The earth is fighting back. We were formed from the dust of the earth. We were commanded to till it, to guard it, to rule over it. Not anymore. Egypt no longer rules over the land. It has fought back and taken back control. Number 5. Insects, animals, or something else. What is Arov? Arov literally means mixture. So either this is a mixture of insects, a mixture of wild animals, or the forced mixing of things that Egypt had kept separate. So going back to Genesis, when Joseph, in the Joseph story, he's a Hebrew, he's known as a Hebrew, he's risen up to second in command, but he can't eat with the other Egyptians because they had this rule. They served him by himself, and then by themselves, the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, for the Egyptians could not dine with the Hebrews, since that would be abhorrent to the Egyptians. They had a forced separation of things that should have been mixed. And God is mixing them together, potentially. Or, it's about the wild beasts or the insects. Either way, there's an undoing of creation. Pestilence. You think you're in control, you think you're ruling over the land, over the animals, well, they're all going to die right now. The animals that emerge from the land are no more. Ruling over the land, the seas, and the animals, no more. No more fish to rule over either. Boils. There's a teaching that the Egyptians tried to get rid of the frogs and the stench that they had brought by burning them, and that this is what ended up being in the kiln. God said to Moses and Aaron, "Each of you take handfuls of soot from the kiln." Theoretically, the handfuls of soot that were the burnt frogs. Let Moses throw it towards the sky in the side of Pharaoh, so that they took the soot of the kiln, appeared before Pharaoh. Remind again, before Pharaoh, before Pharaoh. You can't beat God by burning God's frogs. It caused an inflammation breaking out in boils in human beasts. You should have no more gods besides me. There is only one God established by creation. Pharaoh, you're not God. You can't win this battle. Fiery hail. Moses held out his rod toward the sky, and God sent thunder and hail, and fire streamed down to the ground as God rained down hail upon the land of Egypt. The hail was very heavy, fire flashing in the midst of hail, such that has not fallen on the land of Egypt since it had become a nation. This is something that they had never seen before. We'll read again that we're never going to see it again. This is, I'm going to argue, the collapsing of the expanse. The sky has fallen down. God has already promised not to bring the flood again to completely destroy the world. This is collapsing the expanse, the division between the upper and the lower waters. There is no more sky to divide. Locusts. Locusts invaded all the land of Egypt and settled within the territory of Egypt in a thick mass. It's amazing, by the way, that Pharaoh didn't get the message here. You'd think that this is just terrible. Just take, go, do whatever you want. But the locusts settled in a thick mass. Never before had there been so many, nor there will ever be so many again. They hid all the land from view, and the land was darkened. There is no more light over Egypt. Crossing out, light is created and separated from darkness. The locusts have blocked out the light. Number 10. So what is that choshech? Moses held out his arm toward the sky, and thick darkness descended upon all the land of Egypt for 3 days. This is the original darkness that we found at the start of the creation process. This is darkness over the surface of the deep that used to be Egypt. The death of the firstborn. What next? What could possibly happen next after the death, the end of darkness? In the middle of the night, God struck down all the male firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. In a land that saw the Pharaoh as God, the death of Pharaoh's firstborn son is the death of the next Egyptian god. And a signal. There is no more humanity created to rule over the land. Lastly, after Egypt has been totally ripped up, there is only one more thing left, and that is the wind from God hovering over the water. Then Moses held out his arm over the sea, and God drove back the sea with a strong east wind all that night and turned the sea into dry ground. The waters were split. Not even the wind of God is hovering over the waters. It split the waters. They are completely started from scratch. So did it work? Before we get into did it work, actually, I want to talk a little bit about this psychologically. Because when we have somebody that has been so set in their ways, stuck, developed, they're wrong, but they've built habits upon habits upon habits of this. Sometimes you got to peel back, all the way back to the beginning to build them back up. It's a psychological process, and that's what's happening with Egypt. They developed so poorly. They don't know how to rule benevolently. God tries to give them a chance. It doesn't work. So you got to start over. It doesn't work. Rabbi Nechunya, son of Hakana, said, "Know thou power of repentance. Come and see from Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, who rebelled most grievously against God. As it said, who is the Lord that I shall hearken unto his voice? In the same terms of speech in which he sinned, he repeated, who is like you, O Lord, among the mighty? God delivered him from amongst the dead. How do I know that he died? Or how do I know that he died? Because it is said, for now I put forth my hand and smitten thee. He went and ruled in Nineveh." What is relevant about this? This is a midrash. In the Jonah story, I'm jumping stories, jumping books. Jonah is a prophet. He wakes up one day, God says, go to Nineveh, which at this point in Israelite history, Nineveh represents the absolute evil in the world. They are the dominant capital of a dangerous empire. The Ninevites were cruel, they were abusive, they conquered lands and just merciless. Jonah, go to Nineveh and tell them to repent or I'm going to destroy them. Jonah refuses. He's under the impression they're sinning, they're evil. Why can't you just destroy them? That's justice. What's going on here? And God argues that mercy and justice need to work together, give them a chance to repent, and they'll repent. We have the whole story. He ends up getting swallowed by a big fish, Jonah and the whale. Eventually he goes to Nineveh. He says basically 3 words, Nineveh, you're going to be destroyed, go repent, and they immediately repent. So there's this question, how could they possibly immediately repent where some prophet who doesn't even live there comes into your town and says you're messing up, repent? Well, according to the Midrash, this is Pharaoh who had a second chance at benevolent rule, and he recognized what was happening, and so he repented. It's a rabbinic creation to try to explain the story of how Nineveh was able to get their act together so quickly. And even in our own Torah, you shall not abhor the Egyptian, for you are a stranger in their land. Even though they enslaved us for 400 or 210 or however many years, and we have all these plagues that dealt with them, well, we're still supposed to, we cannot abhor the Egyptian, for you are a stranger in their land. It seems to have worked. So what do we do with this now? I'll pause and take any questions. Yes?
Earlier you said, what's going on with Pharaoh? Why is he taking all this abuse? Why doesn't he do something about these plagues? Well, the answer is very simple. God hardened his heart. The deck was stacked against him.
The deck was stacked against him.
So there's the answer. Why didn't he? God didn't want him to.
Maybe. Because if I believe in free will, and I don't want the idea that Pharaoh didn't have free will, what could God have hardened his heart to? There's a teaching by Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik that God hardened his heart to a specific thing. This God doesn't take away our free will. That would be incomprehensible. I don't want that. That's crazy. What did God harden Pharaoh's heart to? The idea that releasing the Israelites would be beneficial for economic purposes. Right? So he's supposed to release the Israelites because it's the moral thing to do, because it's the right thing to do. But if we get it twisted, I don't want to do the right thing. What I want to do is I want to do the economically beneficial thing. I want to release the Israelites because it'll be good for the Egyptian economy, because it'll stop the destruction so that we can rebuild sooner. That's a self-serving reason to release the Israelites, and God hardened his heart towards that reason so he couldn't think of it, so that he didn't release the Israelites and not learn the lesson. Otherwise, the Egyptians would have continued to sin. Please.
I thought that God hardened Pharaoh's heart so that the Israelites, as well as the Egyptians, could see the power of God as revealed in the plagues.
That could be part of it. That could be part of it. But I imagine that if Pharaoh had stopped and said, I am sorry, this is morally wrong, tell me something that I can do to fix it. Now, I'm projecting my own ideas, of course. Maybe there's other ways to demonstrate God's power for the Israelites and for the Egyptians.
So I'm not clear now. What are you saying that God hardened Pharaoh's heart to?
I'm saying that God hardened Pharaoh's heart to the concept to the realization that maybe releasing the Israelites could be beneficial economically.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We good? So God we have creation of Egypt, completely dismantles Egypt from the ground up. But how does this help us now? So let's review our principles of creation for today. We were uniquely made and created in the image of the one God. We need to remember that. We're responsible to rule over the earth and all things in a benevolent manner. That's another charge that we have. Sometimes we're better at it than others. I'm not going to get into any policy discussion because I think that we can have reasonable, as long as we keep these principles in mind, reasonable debate about how to live up to these principles. But regardless, we need to remember them. But how do we remember to live up to the principles? Let's remember the story. God did not create a perfect world. God created a world that was very good. And very good does not equal perfect. But God did give us a sense of perfection. Day 7. The heaven and the earth were finished in all their array. On the 7th day, God finished the work that it had undertaken, ceased on the 7th day from doing any work. And God blessed the 7th day and declared it holy. Having ceased on it from all the work of creation that God had done, this is the creation of Shabbat. In the Talmud, on Tractate Brachot 57b, it says there are 5 matters in our world which are 1/60th of their most extreme manifestation. Fire, honey, Shabbat, sleep, and a dream. We're going to skip to the Shabbat portion. Shabbat is 1/60th of the world to come. Shabbat is 1/60th of the world to come as a symbol of perfection, of this ideal that we're striving to. So, 1/60th is another way to imagine it's a taste. It's not, there, but it's a taste of it. We see this later on. For in 6 days God made heaven and earth and all that is in them, and then rested on the 7th day. Therefore God blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. How does it remind us to rule benevolently and live morally? Because just telling me that it's a symbol, a taste of the world to come, a taste of perfection, doesn't actually get us there. No. Let's see it as a tool. Humans were uniquely made. These are the principles on the left. What does Shabbat do? Well, we have an elevated sense of worth. There is one of the prohibitions of Shabbat happens to be using money. If nobody uses money on Shabbat, then there's no rich and there's no poor. It reminds us of our equal sense of worth, of our inherent value. Right? So I think in a world where we often categorize ourselves based either on our occupation, on our careers, on our sense of worth, this is a day where everybody has the same amount. Of course, that's not how that works, but it's a step in that direction. It's a day of celebration of self and accomplishments. If we're ceasing from work, we can think about what we've done. We can think about who we are. We don't have to keep progressing towards something. We can pause and reflect and be satisfied with what we have. We can celebrate ourselves. And of course it promotes peace and family with the dinners and the conversations, and if we're not focused on what we have to do, we can focus on the people that we love and spend time with them. The Torah Tamima is a commentary. It says, celebrate Shabbat as though we have completed all of our work. Knowing that Sunday will bring more, Monday will bring more, but we're going to take today as though we have completed it. We are perfect the way we are. Our circumstances, although they are not perfect, we're going to try to think that they are on just this one day to bring joy. So how do we use it? There's 2 ways that we observe Shabbat in the Torah. Remember the day for its holiness, and keep the day for its holiness. There's remember and keep. There's 2 aspects of Shabbat observance. There's remember and keep, ritual and environment. Remembering Thanksgiving. When we remember something, this is creating an active ritual to remember that day. Eating turkey on Thanksgiving is a ritualized food that we eat to remember it's Thanksgiving. Watching the Cowboys lose on Thanksgiving is a reminder that it's Thanksgiving. But what if we ate turkey and watched football on another day? There's something special about doing it on the day itself. Keeping movies. Talking on the phone, right? So eating the popcorn is remembering the movie. But refraining from talking on the phone in movies, it protects the atmosphere of the movie itself. What if people talked on their phones anyway? What if somebody had a FaceTime, the entire movie? They're speaking loudly. It'd be kind of annoying. It would ruin it for everybody else. That's the idea of keeping the movie environment. So we're going to do this on Yom HaShoah, on Holocaust Memorial Day. We often have a moment of silence. We'll light some candles. We'll tell some stories. These are all aspects of remembering and keeping the day itself. If we didn't tell the stories, if we only had a moment of silence, so what is that moment of silence for? What are the candles supposed to remind us? We don't know. And if we didn't have a serious atmosphere, what if it became a party? That would be ridiculous. But if you're only telling stories, well, it could progress that way, depending on the crowd and the type of stories that you're telling. So when it comes to Shabbat, we have the remembering and we have the keeping. We light candles, we say Kiddush, we have wine and challah. That's about remembering Shabbat. And then the keeping Shabbat are the money, the things that we refrain from. Now I'm not telling you what to do on Shabbat. I just wanted to bring this up as a tool to help. So what now? We have to live morally, we have to rule benevolently, and we have this tool of Shabbat that can remind us to keep doing it to the best of our abilities. So creation is not a fairy tale of some kind. It's not a lie. It's not a blank slate. It's a way that God was able to conquer the chaos that had already existed to try to create a world that we ourselves can perfect. And we use Shabbat, however it might be for you, whether it's lighting candles, whether it's saying Kiddush, whether it's turning off, Facebook for a day, to remind ourselves of the important principles that creation started. Now, I have the dinosaurs on this screen because of a personal story. I loved dinosaurs growing up. I knew more about dinosaurs when I was 4 years old than I do now and than I ever will. And when I got to second grade, my teacher said that the dinosaurs couldn't have existed if the Earth was 5,000 so many years old because, well, he said the dinosaurs are millions of years ago, the Earth is 5,000, millions and five, that it doesn't add up. So obviously God put the fossils in the dinosaurs to test our faith. And I immediately lost all respect for what she had to say. I was in second grade. None of what she taught me the rest of the year clicked with me because I thought that she lied. Because of course the dinosaurs existed. That's what my parents told me, that's what the books told me, that's what the museums told me, and everybody's telling me that they existed and that I loved them, and now when I hear from my teacher that they couldn't have, I had two choices. I can either believe her and not what everyone else was telling me, or I could reject her. And so that's what I did. And so she lost me. None of what she taught me the rest of the year sunk in. Now, I'm sure something sunk in, subconsciously, but I had the idea that I didn't believe her, she had to say. Her logic made this puppy sad. What is creation? It's principles for a just and moral life. It's inspiration for ritual practices. Shabbat comes from creation. Ritual practices that keep us bound to one another. And it's the foundation of the light that we are supposed to be unto the nations. I pray that we learn from Egypt's failings and never again see those 12 signs and wonders in our time. Thank you for coming. Any questions? Yes?
Excuse me. I've been holding on to this question because I didn't want to detract from what you were doing here, and I thank you for this program. It was very good. If you take the Bible literally, which I personally do not, and you, as Bible stories and as Genesis is being taught to today's generation, I wonder about a main point, and that is that we are created in God's image. We are perfect as we are, and God created male and female. So I always wondered, how are we created in God's image if there's male and female? And today I think of young children, what we know more about science, what we know more about gender, and I wonder how this is being taught to be all-inclusive for people today.
Sure. Well, I don't take the Bible literally either. I think when we compare Genesis 1 to Genesis 2, we see completely different creation stories, because in Genesis 1 we have the days line up, first came the ground, and then came the plants, and then came the animals, right? In Genesis 2, humans emerge first, and then the plants and animals come next. There's direct contradiction within 2 chapters of the Torah, so I don't think we're even intended to take it literally ever. But to the point about we're created in God's image, I'm going to tackle that first and then get to the male and female. Being created in God's image, look around. Even if we were just to say, unless you're an identical twin, right? None of us look the same. So there's a teaching that when God was minting the coins of all of our faces, right? There's the same base mint, and then what came out is different for everybody. So we are all inherently different. We have a piece of God in all of us that gives us the value, but the literal image is changed, and our perspectives are different, and our needs and our values, those are all going to be different, which is why I think it's important that we take each person's needs seriously. From a general standpoint, yeah, we kind of know what human beings need, but general rules don't apply to the individual. They just don't. So now on to the male and female piece. From what we know now about gender and about sexuality, I'm going to differentiate between this section, which I believe is intended to teach an ancient community that had a hierarchy between male and female, that hierarchy should have been removed, and that they were created the same time. I think that's a separate message than saying only male and only female was created. I think that from what we know today, it's more than that. Did that answer your question?
Well, kind of, but I guess I want Judaism to be as all-inclusive and accepting as possible. Mm-hmm. And I'm well aware that some rabbis and some synagogues are more that way than others these days.
Yeah.
Certainly an Orthodox community is not as accepting of non-male, female identifying people.
Right.
But as I said, I think of young people who do not fit into those categories that are alienated enough in our society.
Right.
And likely getting worse with the administration we have, but that's another topic. So, I think about them learning Bible stories and how that reads to them.
Absolutely.
So I know you can't answer the global question, but I would hope that there would be some exception made to be more inclusive for those people.
I don't need to make an exception, because to me, being made in God's image means that everybody was made in God's image, right? And I know my own perspective, I know my own story, and that's all I really know. So if I talk to somebody who is trans, I can't tell them what their experience is. I can't tell them that they don't fit into the only thing that I can say is that they fit into the box that they are created in God's image.
Okay.
What that image is, I think we're harping on what image is,
Yeah.
right? I think image doesn't necessarily mean a picture. I'm taking it more as the likeness, the value from that side. Did that?
Thank you very much. No.
Today, I have 3 generations of family. There's me, my children, and their children. And I look around and I see that many of the churches are empty, many of the synagogues are empty. By empty, I don't mean really empty. I mean, people are leaving or not joining.
Mm-hmm.
And it's getting worse and worse. And when you talk to the 3rd generation, you find out they do have a worship, and that's technology. They worship technology, they don't
Yeah.
worship a God. They don't reject the holidays, they're fun.
Right.
They're growing up with the holidays, they celebrate the holidays, but there's no concept that God created the heavens and earth.
Mm-hmm.
There just isn't any. They don't
Sure.
buy it.
Sure. So how do we teach this? This is where I think using the Torah as, when I say metaphor, I don't mean that it's, I think the word metaphor can be loaded. It's a translation tool. It's a way to teach lessons in an ancient way that we've continually tried to renew. So if you were to compare, for instance, the story of Noah and the flood to the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's clear that either one came from another or they came from a similar source. But where the Torah is important is finding the differences between them. So what I would say is trying to extract the values from the Torah that we really want them to know. For me, I'm going to keep getting back to everybody was created in God's image. Everyone is created in God's image. If I'm going to translate that to somebody who doesn't believe in God, everyone has inherent worth. We're all born with inalienable rights. I'm saying the same thing. I'm just putting it in a theological language because I believe it in a theological way, because I think that it gives it more significance to say that God above created all of us and then God created all of us equally. To me, that gives it more oomph. But if I'm talking to somebody who doesn't believe in God, then it doesn't work for them. So I need to be able to tell it in a way that they can understand what I'm trying to say. Yes?
In literature and the arts, God is always pictured as a male. But that's a supposition that could probably not be true. Could be more of a spirit that we have.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. In literature and the arts, God is often described or pictured as a male. We often use gendered he. I don't use he for God either. I just say God. Says because I think the same thing. Why that is? Well, I wish I remember who said this, and I'm sorry, but the message is, if the horses believed in God, the perception of God would be of a horse. Because we perceive of who we are. We know what we believe, we know our story, and we project that onto God. And so when we say God is a man, essentially what we're doing is creating God in our image. If we're a man. Right. And if we're making God dominating and violent, well, maybe that's projecting some of what we believe as a ruler should be. And I don't think that that's true, and I don't think that that's helpful. Did that answer your question?
Well, it was a male-dominated world, so therefore they would have believed in God.
In a male-dominated world, the male would think that God is the top. Sociologically, yes.
So we are a generation sitting in this room who saw a lot of evil. And it's still going on. So how does that...
We're a generation in this room that saw a lot of evil, and it's still going on. How does that fit in the creation story? God rules over the upper waters, and humanity rules over the lower waters. And we have free will, and we use it to do good things, and we use it to do evil things. And I like to think that this means two things for God. One, God cries with us when we suffer, and God celebrates our successes. And two, God stays in the upper realm for whatever reason. But we are the ones who are tasked to fix this world and to rule benevolently. And we have a lot of work to do.
If you say that God stays up there and doesn't affect the earth, how come he hardened Pharaoh's heart? And if he got involved and hardened Pharaoh's heart, how can you blame Pharaoh?
I'm going to repeat the question while I try to think of a response. If I say that God's staying in the upper realm and not impacting the lower realm, how can I say that God hardened Pharaoh's heart? And if God hardened Pharaoh's heart, how can we blame Pharaoh? Is that the question?
Yes.
I don't believe that God stays in the upper realm. I believe that God delegates us to rule over the lower realm. Whether that allows for miracles, I think that's another conversation. But I'm going to read this story as though it's literature, and I'm going to read this story as though it's lesson-packed story. That's God is looking down at the management. Middle management isn't doing their job. So stepping in to try to fix some things. Now, how can I not blame Pharaoh? I think this is a question that we've wrestled with for thousands of years. Because either Pharaoh had free will or he didn't. And if we're saying he didn't have free will, then what God did to Pharaoh and what God did to the Egyptians is unimaginably cruel. I choose to believe that God is not unimaginably cruel. So that means, well, God couldn't have taken away his free will. That's a choice that I'm making. That's a choice that I'm making.
Do we have any idea what the Egyptian creation story is? And whether Pharaoh was in fact violating their creation story?
I don't know. I don't know the Egyptian creation stories. Yeah, I don't. The question was, do I know the Egyptian creation stories, and would what Pharaoh has been doing violate the Egyptian creation story? I don't. Yeah. Well, one last question. Thank you very much.